Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mastering Self. This is week 3, where we dive into stages of adult development. So this is adult human maturing and the process through which we all go through and continue to go through. So a really, really, really juicy session here today. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm calling from, and Sarah as well, the Arakwal people of Bundjalung Nation, recognizing their continued connection to land, water, and beautiful community like you folk. And I'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. In today's session, we're going to kick off, as per always, reviewing the last 7 days and what you found in the last 7 days, what you've noticed. We'll then move into stages of adult human development. It's basically a mini class in developmental psychology, which is really, really cool. And then we'll move into deepening awareness of breath for the last 30 minutes. For today, the facilitators are myself and Sarah. Sarah will be leading most of the session. And so for now, let's come into this space together, regardless of where you are calling from. Let's take a moment and close our eyes, get comfortable. And we're not necessarily going to do anything new in this moment that we take here. Simply that which you have been practicing for the last 7 to 14 days. Allow yourself to drop into that practice for the next few minutes. Using your hands, if you like, on the belly, or if you're no longer using hands, that's fine. Counting if you like, or not. Over to you now for this moment. Keeping your eyes closed and pretending you're starting the sitting all over again and bringing your awareness back to your breath. Last couple breaths. And without a rush, when you're ready, gently opening your eyes. And so as we ease our way in to this session here today, let's review the last 7 days. Yeah. How have the last 7 days been for you? What have you noticed arise in mind, arise in the space of your awareness? From the ego, that initial thought that might kick in, to the superego, that thought that thinks about the thought that just kicked in. How did you go finding yourself in the seat of awareness, aware of the thoughts arising and falling? What did you find challenging? What did you find really worked for you in regards to your morning routine and ritual, and in regards to the box breathing exercise? And so we'll go into a breakout room with one other to share for about 5 minutes on what we've noticed for the last 7 days. And we'll see you back in for an open group conversation. Enjoy.
1 minute, and I'll be ready. There we go. Enjoy.
It is one of my favorite things to watch people's faces coming and the expressions on their faces coming out of the breakout rooms. Sometimes it's sheer horror because they were in the middle of saying something and they've just been ejected out. And then often it's just laughter and cheeky looks on the faces. And so what has the experience been over the last 7 days? What have you noticed? What's been playing out for you? What are the cheeky buggers in mind? We told you this last week. With all of these voices in your head, we're going to send an extra 2 invoices to each of you. So what were they chatting about throughout the week? What did you notice, and what came up in that breakout room?
I'll go if you like, Dan.
Go for it, Dave.
It was good to see Lee and Kate, my fellow recent retreat friends, which we hadn't really connected for a little bit. So we had a little catch up, which was nice. I think the theme for us is we are meditating. And I mentioned that I think I'd put an extra expectation on myself that I was doing a course. So I should be like a super meditator, or I should be doing more. But I think Kate just said, just stop. It's okay. Don't that's completely, don't do that. Don't put that expectation. Lee mentioned that. So I thought that was nice. I think I'd actually done that. I think I felt like I should be a super meditator, whatever that is. That's part of the super ego, I guess. So it's yeah. So it was comforting that I should just drop into just exactly what it's delivering to me right now, which it is.
Thanks, David. That's course 2, Super Meditator, coming to you in 2022. Thanks,
Right.
mate.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everyone. Me and Ash got kicked off. Unfortunately, Ash was in the middle of talking. I would love to hear what she and so many other people have experienced the last 7 days. For myself, I really noticed a relationship between pain and blame. It's a very immediate, it's very quick happening. And for example, I hit my head 2 days ago on a wall while I was thinking about my dad, and it became all his fault. All of a sudden it was like, oh God, yeah. And then I caught myself doing that, and it became quite funny. It was like, how interesting, it hurts, it just hurts, it just happened. And then with the ego and super ego, I noticed the sense making that I'm so often doing with everything. Also, not always, I do trust a lot, but I noticed finding, looking for patterns and finding patterns. Sometimes they just come to you and you think, oh, well, if that hadn't happened, that wouldn't happen, and that. And it's quite fun. So I think I enjoy it. My ego enjoys it. But then afterwards, when I think, is it really necessary to spend this time thinking about this? I notice not so much, and then trust comes in. I think that's the super ego as I understand it.
Yeah, beautiful. And as you can hear, there's different flavors, different colors and layers to the voices, and sometimes they can be much less useful and quite hurtful as well, right? And then in those cases, we're really wanting to shift those and change the language that is playing out, and teach it a new language, one that is more supportive, actually. Yeah. And then there's another layer that comes in, exactly what you were kind of inquiring about. Is it necessary at all to have this thought? And the answer sits with you in that sense as to whether it is or isn't.
Thank you.
Thanks, Georgina.
What came up thank you for that sharing, Georgina. What came up as well in response to you and also Dave is, as you start to notice these, whether it's particular expectations in sitting or in other areas of life, or certain relationship with pain or blame, like you mentioned, and you start to observe that more sort of objectively, and there's still a subjective sense of someone observing that potentially. So getting familiar with that, like who or what is observing that? What is actually seeing those thoughts? If it can be seen, it can't be you, right? Because you can see it. So getting more familiar with kind of what we're talking in that me space, what we have labeled as me, and getting familiar with that. What is the feel or the sense, is the quality there in that space? And becoming more familiar with that subjective space there as you start to observe more and get more objectivity to certain thought patterns or things that are playing out more objectively.
Anyone else that would like to share?
On the back of that, kind of connecting all three shares, what comes up for me is the mind chatter that comes when I wasn't able to meditate or have my sitting to get that objectivity that Sarah speaks to. So then lots of different meaning making happens in the day after that if I'd missed a sitting. But what came up with Lee and David was, like, out of the blue for me, was that it's sort of a distraction from what my intention initially was to do that sitting. So if I miss the sitting, it's like, oh, I'm not soaked into the moment like it could have been, and this day isn't going to go as well. All of that, I can tweak my mind talk to sort of become objective, or notice make those thoughts become objective in the moment without the sitting as a practice in the moment. So what I wanted to touch on was, if a sitting is missed or whatever, the point isn't that sitting is needed to access that, but definitely super helpful. But I notice if it might be helpful to someone that, yeah, I fall into this whole day isn't good enough. This whole day isn't perfect because the sitting didn't happen, which is the exact opposite of the point of all this. Yeah.
And that's where the power lies, within everyone's hand, to intercept that. If you are in a seat of awareness and can bring yourself into the seat of awareness, aware of those thoughts that are, saying, well, the rest of the day is going to be not so great because this didn't happen, or because that happened and that person cut me off on the road, or whatever it might be. It's within everyone's power to intercept those thoughts and go, hang on a second, is that a useful thought right now? And if not, what would be a more useful thought, if any at all? Yeah.
And also with the sitting in general, in the beginning, it might be more of a sort of a bit more of a conscious effort to actually start sitting and make it a bit of a habit, a routine, a ritual. And then at some point it just happens kind of automatically. And it might not always happen in the way you expect it to. It might be in a different part of the day, or it might not happen, Kate, like sometimes there's just a day missed or whatever. And that's a part of the process as well. From my perspective, there's a process there of, like, first actually commit to the practice and make it happen. And then at some point you kind of can let go of that practice a little bit as it becomes more just natural as a way of being. And then even in day-to-day life, there's just a mind emptiness or just a spaciousness in life as it becomes more and more familiar in that sense. But from my perspective, it's very much a part of the process as well to feel a bit of friction there of like, should I sit, should I not sit, and feel a bit of the confusion that happens there. So it's all part of the process in that sense. So yeah.
It's almost to be able to experience having missed a day and what goes on when you do miss a day and how quickly do you respond. And remember, we said 2 or 3 days and you jump back on. The research shows that it doesn't really hinder you picking up the habit too much because of the neurophysiology. It's, you know, how do you respond is the most important thing in that. And who here has missed a day at least in the last 14? Cool. And so when you do, how do you respond? And how soon do you respond? Yeah. Cool. We'll move on. We've got another 2 opportunities to jump into shares, and particularly around the meditation towards the back end of the session. And so having started off with setting the foundations there, and then last week we moved into seeing, simply starting to really see the narratives that are being played out by the ego, constructing those stories about situations, and those stories being the ones that might have us feel a particular way. And as we're getting better and better and better as coming from the seat of awareness and seeing those stories, that's going to be really useful as we move into this week with stages of human development, adult development, the maturing of the adult human being, because this is about ego development in adult human being and beyond. And so being able to see the constructing of the ego will be really useful as we navigate through these stages of development. So as we get going with the next 30 minutes here, okay, and we dive deep into stages of adult human development, it's actually an exercise in itself. So if everyone can get a pad and pen for the next 30 minutes. And as we go through the levels, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about as we go into the next slide. But as we go through the levels, there's 2 key things in this exercise here. As we're going through them and you start to learn the traits of each level, first exercise is write down moments in your life where you remembered yourself going through that particular level, or at least having those thoughts. Yeah. You're like, oh yeah, I remember when I was about 5 or 6, I really felt like I was in that realm. And then when I started to become a teenager, I was really thinking about that. And what is it about that level that we have mentioned that has you go, yeah, I feel like that's where I was at that point in time. So map that out for yourself, and you're not going to have mapped out throughout all the levels. There's only probably 3 or 4 levels that you're going to have mapped yourself out into, which will be these 3, the yellow, orange, and green, just to say briefly there. Red, yellow, orange, green. Second exercise over the next 30 minutes, as we're going through these levels, who do you know right now that is currently at each of those levels, or at least maybe at red, yellow, orange, and green? Yeah. And if you can pick any that are beyond that, awesome. But let's focus on these 4. It might be a child that you know that's currently going through one of these levels. It might be a brother, a sister, a mother, a father. It might be a boss or a co-worker, or an entire nation that you might see going through one of these levels at the moment, or a particular public figure that might be at one of these levels. Okay. Over to you, Sarah. Do you want this slide or the one before?
No, this is good. So as we're going to walk through these stages, it's really important to keep in mind that we've mapped out reality and human growth and human change through different stages. And we've mapped out what is actually already occurring in reality. So we're not showing you anything new. This is already happening. And also, as we walk through these stages, we're going towards something that's actually not possible to map that out. We actually don't have the language to explain it in words. So everything that you see here, it's for you to sort of inquire in yourself, hey, what does this mean for me, and what can I do with this as well? And to start recognizing this playing out in reality, in, like Dan said, in other people, in yourself, because this is already happening. So we're not showing you anything new in that sense. So as we move through the stages, you can almost view this as an ever widening spiral, where the earlier stages have very different perspectives than the later stages or the higher stages. And growth happens to a logical frequency through the stages where the worldview expands. So there's an expansion of oneself and their own perspectives, and also there's also an expansion in the world in general, and how certain events and other people and certain traits and behaviors are viewed. And as change happens in the individual, so it happens in the interior, there's also a change in exterior behavior naturally that comes through these stages. And we will touch on that a little bit later as well, how that specifically looks like. But that's kind of how this happens as well.
Sarah, if I can just jump in with one thing as well, as a pre-frame, that with these levels, whilst it seems like one's higher than the other, there's no stage here that is better than the other. This is really important to hold in mind over the next 30 minutes. It's the same as saying that being a teenager is better than being an infant, or being an adult is better than being a teenager. It's not. They're just different stages of development. So regardless of where any of us are finding ourselves at, it's just a different stage of development, and it's just not accurate that one is better than the other.
Yeah. So as we just start with the bottom one, archaic, you see that in the brown color there, that started about 1400 years ago. And that's really where the basic need or the basic drive there is this to stay alive. You see that in babies. It's really about staying alive, and it's about the baby can't take into consideration yet that there are other people around them that also need to stay alive. So it's really about, how do I stay alive? Then the next stage is magenta, which is about safety and security. It's all about how can I stay safe and how can I stay secure within myself. Then the next stage is red, it's power gods, and that's the stage where power and action comes in. So this is actually the first stage where there's an active sense of self that comes online, a certain will that comes online as well. So this is really the birthplace of willpower, which is really important for a human being to have some sense of, I've got a separate will to what maybe my parents want for me. The next stage is traditional amber, the yellow stage there. And that's really about stability and purposeful living. This is a stage where the second person perspective comes in as well. So this is where group perspective comes in as well. So now I can take into consider my own needs and my own desires, but I can also take into consideration the needs and desires of people that are directly around me. So that might be my direct family or my direct tribe. That really comes online in this stage. Most people in society are viewing from amber, orange, and green. So those are the stages that I'm now talking about. Orange is modern rational reasoning. So this is the stage where success and autonomy comes in. So this is an individual stage again, which speaks to a third person perspective, which can take objectivity upon oneself. So in this stage, we're really talking about the importance of science, and the corporate world lives mostly in this stage. Dan, if you got something to add there?
Yeah, science, rational reason is this orange stage here, with amber being nationalistic perspectives, a fundamental religion, but it's not all religion. There's religion that kind of comes back around further up here again, but fundamental religion in amber. And red might be quite tribal in that sense as well. Yeah, so not only just child, but also tribal, and also just generally with these levels that people are arriving at these levels here sooner in their lifespan. So where people were arriving, say 200 years ago, or there was a time where the majority of the world was sitting here. Yeah. And then it keeps evolving, and it will even evolve past this model here over the next 1,000 years, for example.
Yeah, so about 300 years ago, modern orange rational reasoning came online. And about 60 years ago, which was kind of in the hippie movement, green came online. And in today's society, about 30% is viewing from this green stage. And green is about human bond. It says it in the word there. It's postmodern, so it's about community, harmony, and equality. So in this stage, where orange is about hierarchy, in this stage it becomes everyone is equal, is seen here. So in green, feminist movements lives in green, care for the planet, care for the animals, care for the other cultures. There's an appreciation for other cultures here as well, and wanting to shine a light on the poor people, for example, or help people that have been disadvantaged in some way. That's really in this green stage. And what we're seeing now in the world is a slow movement from orange to green. And this is all within first tier. Dan, can you click that? Yeah. So this is all within first tier, and each level in first tier kind of only confirms their own values, their own worldviews. So first tier is not yet able to see that other perspectives are also valuable. At least most people in the first tier will see their own perspective as more true or more valuable or just the truth. So it can vary a little bit, but yeah, there's not an appreciation yet for other perspectives. So my perspective is definitely better than yours, kind of, or more inclusive, or whatever the statement is there. But that's kind of the how we can recognize first tier.
And it might simply just be really difficult to see outside of one's own perspective. You might be able to see the other perspectives, but I just don't fully understand how, like, this just feels so much more true. More true, not wrong, right? And it might lower down here, but you're wrong, I'm right. But it's more about, this just feels more true here than yours. That at each level they believe. So for example, you might have nationalists, people sitting at Amber looking over at modern science, and rationalists going, you guys are all going to hell, and you might be like, you're going about this the wrong way. This is the way, and this is our way. In that sense, make Australia great again is Amber. Yeah. Whereas the orange would be looking at Amber going, what are you guys talking about? Bring some rationality into this, and, like, you know, objectively have a look at it.
Science.
Let's put it to science in that sense. Orange might look at the greenies and environmentalists and be like, stop hugging trees, and simply, like, you know,
do something useful.
do something useful in that sense. And the greenies are just like, get your head out of the science and, like, start to see more broadly and so on. And the green can be really, 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 really passionate. So much so that they're, like, about the cause that they're activating and being activists for. So much so that the green stage has received the label of mean green, because it can come through so strongly. They feel so passionate about it, and you're seeing a lot of it in the last 18 months from a lot of the things that have arisen. There's been a lot of stuff going back and forth, and just with a lot of energy in that sense. So, but that wasn't also, I just want to say that wasn't all the greens as well, all of the polarity that's been going on. That's gone beyond green.
Well, the reason that there's polarity and different perspectives, the fact that there's different perspectives is fine, but that's not accepted. That culture war, kind of what we've been seeing over the last months, is because most of those people are in this first tier. stage of development. So 95% of the planet at this point in time is in this first tier. So also for you on the call, like start to recognize these dimensions in yourself as well. Hey, certain perspectives where might you be viewing from right now? Yeah, I actually feel like science is really important. Cool. Then you kind of like get a bit of a sense what's happening there. And just to really become aware of these dynamics, that's really our aim here, to become aware of these dynamics in that sense.
And so it's not really about to not be, because the sound of some of these might not be all that great. It's not about not being in one of these. It's about integrating each of these in a really healthy way, because each of these levels have incredible usefulness. Each of them do, and they have their limitations. So we're looking to transcend those limitations, but you can only do that by including the usefulness of each level, which brings us to the second tier.
Yeah. And so the second tier is really a radical shift in perspective. It's a radical change in individual's perspectives. And as you can see in second tier, it's more about presence and living with and as the moment as reality. So in second tier, especially in Teal, what really starts to come online is seeing through narratives quicker. So kind of what we've been showing about the ego and the super ego at second tier, that becomes quite natural, especially later in second tier, so especially in turquoise. But in Teal, that really starts to ground itself. In green, the self-inquiry kind of starts in that area. But in Teal, that becomes kind of like natural and fluid to start seeing through those narratives quite quickly, quite easily. And to start integrating those earlier stages as well, because as we transcend, we also include the earlier stages. So we still might care for the environment and for nature and so on. We still are also able to achieve things in life and are successful because we have transcended and included those earlier stages. But it's just not the only way that we're looking at the world. So we can still use those perspectives and use those ways of living, but it's not solely what we're living from, or that's not our main sort of intention, if you want to call it like that. And what is the difference in Teal really is that there's a change in perspective in terms of how evolution is viewed. So what comes online is Teal is a clear seeing that evolution is happening on a consciousness level, and that individuals and consciousness is changing through different stages, and that evolution is literally playing out in front of us right now. And whilst maybe in orange and also in green, evolution is already, people are familiar with the term evolution, but it's more seen outside of oneself. So it's more seen as like, sure, culture changes, or in history, we've changed through time, and there are different ways that we're doing things now than, let's say, 1,000 years ago. But at Teal, there's a real different shift in evolution can be seen playing out within the individual space, or in the interior spaces of individuals, of as well oneself as in other groups. And because that can be seen, there's a acceptance that can come online for the other stages, because it's just like, this is just how evolution happens. We need those stages, and we all go and evolve through those stages. Teal is the first stage that can see that as an individual is at Teal, that individual can see that they have gone through all those stages. So they can really start to easily recognize in their own self where they have been, maybe at a particular age or in a particular context, where they have been hanging out through these other stages as well. And at Teal, there is a real capacity to be flexible as well. So there is there's a flexibility that comes online in terms of there can be a doing, but there can also be a more being as well. Dan, have you got something to add there?
No, all good for now.
Okay. So then at turquoise, the global view expands even more. So here so at Teal, we already take into consideration the cosmos more. So green is really about the planet, world-centric. And then the Teal is more the cosmos. So there are also other planets like Pluto and the moon and the sun and so on. So at Teal, really, someone can really on a day-to-day basis see that they're part of a cosmos. At turquoise, what starts to kind of come online is multiverses. So really even wider perspective. Let me think what I've got to share on turquoise more.
So turquoise really with the construct can see the construct arising, the ego construct arising in time, in real time. As it arises, immediately can see that it's ego constructing immediately, rather than the identification with and as the ego construct. So how often do we have those thoughts that happen in response to a situation, and we're so identified with them that they seem like absolute truth, that we're not even seeing them as thoughts, but rather absolute truth. Whereas at this stage of turquoise, as that thought, even if it's a trigger and something's got someone angry, doesn't mean you don't get angry anymore up here or whatever else. But let's just say a trigger happens because of something's out there, it's been perceived a particular way. As it arises, even the feeling and the thinking, it's seen immediately, which means that the response is one that is more useful and not a reactive response. Yeah, in real time. That's the big difference with turquoise there.
Yeah, so there's the construct is literally seen as a central processing unit that constantly creates a sense of self, and that really starts to come online in turquoise. With teal, what can be a bit of a shadow in teal is like we've also mentioned a little bit of the shadows in green, like that mean green, that enthusiasm around the environment and so on. A shadow in teal is pride. So an idea that I know it now, because teal can see so much more than a lot of earlier stages, there can be a pride that comes online in this stage. And that's really the shadow aspect of teal there. At turquoise, what can happen a little bit there as a shadow is a non-action. Because at turquoise, there's even more of a radical acceptance of the things are just perfect and they're just perfect the way it is. So why should I even bother doing something about that? So that's like a really non-action, whilst a healthy integration of action is also actually required for just a healthy way of being in the world. And there can still be action taken, but it's just taken from a really different place and from a quite a lighthearted way in that sense. Also at turquoise and indigo, forgetting starts to happen because one is so present in the moment that past and future are just like, oh, you said something to me yesterday, I totally forgot about that. So really forgetting starts to happen. So to be able to work with that in a healthy way is useful at turquoise as well. Then second tier briefly is about source. So really working as source and identifying as that. As you can see now on the screen, there are some identifications there as well. So I am that is what it says as indigo. And it's really everything is arising within me as me. And that's really a much wider identification with who I take myself to be. The individual self is at indigo basically gone. And at turquoise, it really, really starts to clear.
So here, as Sarah says, everything is arising within me as me. You know, we might think, oh yeah, thoughts and feelings, but the entire cosmos is arising within me as me, because at this level, at a more consistent basis on a daily basis, this being is not identified even with this body. Yeah, this being is identified with reality as it unfolds, with life, not this life that we live and we do work in, but simply life as energy running through everything, through the cells in your body, through the tree, through this, all the air, everything is connected and running and is arising within me as me, is this level here. And so when we don't want to spend, we do need to move along so that we can get through all of the beautiful content here. And where we'll be spending most of our time in this course for the rest of the course is mostly around the amber, orange, green, and a little bit of teal, maybe halfway there. Yeah, that's where we're gonna really be grounding in that, so that we can become aware of the behaviors and patterns there. It takes, on average, about 4 years in terms of development for a person to go through one level to the next. What we've noticed with coaching, though, with one-on-one coaching, is that it seems to be accelerated, and that people move through this process about at twice the speed in that sense. So we've had people that have been working with us for 3 years, 3.5 years, and have moved through a stage and a half in in that time. So I've experienced that myself working with people, but in terms of myself being coached, but also with the clients that we work with as well. So Sarah, did you want to take us through these bits on the side really quickly?
Yeah. So you can see some sort of main identifications there. So just going to touch on the most important ones here. So in amber, you see my people. So like I said before already, it's really about my tribe, my people, the care, and what is important in my life is around my direct people. So that might be my direct family, my direct tribe, just the people that are directly around me. I don't really care about anyone else at this stage. Not that I necessarily do harm, but it's just not within my zone of care in that sense.
It's less care as well. It's not I don't care, but there's less care for the others around there.
Yeah. Then then can you click one through, because then I can immediately touch on individual and collective. So as we go through the stages, you can also see how the focus goes from individual to collective. And that's kind of like how we move through that spiral. And there's a constant shift, if you want to call it like that, between, oh, now the focus is more on individual, on myself, and now the focus is more on others, the collective, where the individual is a little bit more of a forward energy. And like I've got certain goals and things that I want to achieve or bring forward. That's more in the individual stages, whilst the collective stages is more about the we space and other people and other things that are included in that. So we, as you can see from bottom to top, we move through this different sort of where a little bit of the focus is, and as we come to the higher stages, individual and collective kind of start to integrate in and blend into each other. So there's less of a real separation there, but it's still useful to point it out here. So at amber, you see that my people, so there's a focus on the collective there. Then as we move through orange, what becomes really important there is I'm a somebody. I can now achieve things in the world that are important to me. Really important stage in terms of I know that I can do things in the world and I can achieve certain things if I go for things. So this is a bit more of an individual focus again. The focus is a bit more on what are my needs and how do I get them met in that sense. Then we move up again to green and we see we are all equal. So that's a collective focus again. The focus is not so much on me. Sensitivity comes online in this stage. So it's more on how can we all work together in equality. Dan, have you got anything to add there?
Yeah, just, amber being my people, collective. My people might mean my nation, yeah, or my group, whatever that might be, or religion and so on. The I am somebody in the modern orange there, that's where a lot of your mindset style language comes in, the achiever mode, competitiveness, self-help books and all of that stuff. Really important stage, in terms of one's development. And then
motivation, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And then the collective, we are equal together with the environment and animals and so on, and let's do what's right for all in that sense.
Yeah. And then at tail you can see I am interdependent. If you just go one slide back, I'm interdependent, and what that means, I'm independent, but I'm also dependent. So I'm both simultaneously, and I can see that I'm a part of a larger system and a part of a larger ecosystem. This stage is a little bit more of an individual stage. Again, still really important to have enough time for oneself and to inquire into certain thought process, because this is such a radically different stage than the first tier. It's the first stage of second tier, and it's kind of like a really important stage to really start to integrate earlier stages into one's own perspective again. So yeah.
And so before we move on to the next slide, just writing down for yourself where it is that you've noticed yourself, like where in your life did you notice yourself going through any of these phases here, and who are you currently seeing going through one of these phases? And our intention for this, there's a lot here, right? Our intention for this is simply to start to see this in yourself and out there in the world. Start to be able to identify this. That's all. Yeah. And next course, we go deeper on a lot of this stuff, and we start to go, we take the orange and green and we start moving towards that second tier there.
Yeah. So here again, a bit of a distinction between first tier and second tier. So first tier is mostly around need-based. And the reason it is called need-based is because it's mostly in this physical reality still, in this gross reality, things that we can observe and touch and so on. And within that reality, there's also a need to eat, a need for money, a need for survival. And as one starts to inquire around, hey, maybe death is not actually the end point, maybe there's something beyond, that's where second tier starts to emerge. So that's kind of where we move more into the subtle spaces in terms of different dimensions of reality as well. Yeah, like first tier is really more about survival, and there's a that's necessary, right? Like we need to go through that in order to take care of ourselves anymore. At some point, we know, hey, there's actually more than this, and that's where second tier comes online, and it's a bit more being based. So second tier, especially in turquoise, Teal can still be quite doing, but especially in turquoise, there's really more of a beingness that comes online, and kind of like a softness and a sort of a relaxation in that sense. Teal can actually feel quite a fair bit of responsibility to be responsible in the way one shows up in the world, because that person really knows the way I show up actually influences other people. So there's a lot of responsibility felt at this stage as well. And the third tier is really, you can see through gross reality through subtle reality. Subtle reality is basically thinking and feeling, right? If we say subtle reality, that's that dynamic, thinking and feeling. And then in third tier, there's also a witnessing of the causal space, which is really that witnessing space, which is even behind the causal space in that sense, that starts to come online there.
I think let's skip this part, or maybe really quickly go through.
I'll go through it really quick. So as you can see here on the right-hand side, you see the different time, different ways at different stages that people perceive time. So for example, in red, you see the focus is on the now. It's quite reactive. It's like, what do I need to do right now? Child, you might see this in a child. A child doesn't think yet what's happening in 5 years or in 3 months' time. A child is very much in the moment and what's happening now. Then in amber, you can start to see 3 months in the future. So what comes online here is I can sort of anticipate what's going to happen in 3 months' time. Orange is a 5-year worldview, and the reason it's also a worldview. So an orange can see I'm a part of the human race that's existing all over the planet, and I can see 5 years in the future. What becomes important, like I already mentioned, is success achieving. So planning one's own future and goal setting becomes important at this stage. Then green can see 15 to 25 years in the future, again a worldview. So the environmental concern comes online because I can see my action today influence the environment and influence what is possible in the future for the animals and so on. Then anything to add there?
Nope.
I'm almost out of breath. I'm speaking so quick.
I can take over for the next 2 minutes.
No.
And so at Integral, it's 50 to 1,000 years in the future is what people are actually concerning themselves with. It's what they're spending their time, delving into in that sense. So it's really about which time period are they at each level are they concerning themselves with, right?
Yeah.
And
on a day-to-day basis, what are people actually? So maybe someone can see intergenerationally, like Teal. So I can see my actions today influence the generations after me, the generations after me, the generations after me, and I'm being influenced by earlier generations. But my actions are not necessarily aligned with that. So we're going to look at that as well. Where is someone cognitive understanding might be, oh yeah, there's something like intergenerational as a time frame, that's something that exists, but I'm not necessarily taking it into consideration in my day-to-day choices and actions. And also Teal sees everything as a construct. So kind of sees time and space, is seen as a construct, as a dimension that can be looked through as well.
Let's fly through these ones, I reckon.
So here
simple.
We just have from bottom to top, we have the cognitive line of development together with the moral line of development. So the care line and how care grows up and matures through stages. So as you can see, the red and the 2 stages below are the pre-conventional stages, which the care is only about I. A baby can't consider yet that there's also someone else that needs to be fed and so on. It's about, I need my food right now. That's what a baby thinks of, right? So and some adults at the red stage don't consider others yet. So it's really about the I. Then at amber, us comes online. So there's care for us, my direct community, my direct tribe. It's a bit similar to what we already walked through. So maybe, world-centric is all of us humans. So here at orange is about humans. So it's important to care for all of us humans. At green, it's all of us, the web of life. So also animals, nature, and so on. Then at teal, there's planet-centric. So that kind of goes beyond the world even again.
I think the key things here between these in the first tier, obviously these 3 are the I, and then only us, if you can imagine our nation, our country, the greatest, so on and so on, or this religion, like this is the right religion, versus then going up into orange, and there can be a kind of disidentifying with that and going into world-centric, all of us humans, but only humans, right? There's not so much care. It's not that they don't care, but it's just kind of almost a blind spot of the planet and animals at a deeper level where our actions are aligning with a care for all of that.
Yeah. And through these stages, it's really important to mention, you can already go to this slide for people to have a read a bit whilst I'm talking. As we develop through these stages, it's really important to mention that there are healthy and unhealthy expressions for each stage. So higher stages are not necessarily more healthy than earlier stages. That's not necessarily true. So they're both healthy and unhealthy expressions at each stage. And our intention is really how can we integrate more of ourselves for us to have a healthy sense of self, no matter where you're viewing from at the moment. Also with these stages, it can really look like that we are developing higher and that we're becoming more in a sense. But as this arc also shows and suggests, is that we're actually becoming less of ourselves in a sense, and therefore we becoming more because we're widening our perspective. But it's how we clear through earlier perspectives facilitates what's actually already true for each and every one of us. So we're already fully enlightened, all of us on this call. It just depends to what level of distraction you're distracted into some of these earlier perspectives. And as you can see on this arc, you can see that the first half of the arc is about knowledge. So it's about information, about skills, about competencies. It's about understanding more pieces of the puzzle. It's increased complexity. Know more and do more. That's very much in this first half of the arc. Second half of the arc is really about wisdom. It's a bit more intuitive. It's about instead of information, it's about transformation, to see within, around, and beneath. So it really becomes dynamic here. See the whole dynamic playing out within oneself, within the world, and so on. And this is sometimes for individuals at these later stages, it's even hard to describe what they're actually experiencing because it's kind of so complex and so inclusive that we almost don't have words to describe that. I think that's all that needs to be said.
People in this first half, like as we all will go through or have gone through this half here, it feels like it's about gaining the knowledge and becoming something and someone and achieving and arriving somewhere, right? And really being certain about our place in the world until the crossover here is where we really start to ask that question of, okay, pretty stable with work and there's the house and kids and it's all happening. And now what? What now? And
or just who am I?
Like who am I? What is all? And really, those questions, those inquiries start to come online around this stage here. And so it's not, these aren't, we can't box people in, because they're quite, we will have switch points in moments of stress that can take us back to a pattern from our self-centric or group-centric. In moments of stress or anxiousness or whatever it might be, fatigue actually. So these are all kind of fluid, and it's more about, I'm spending more of my time in here and less of my time in there. But we're going to go into the movement between these stages.
Yeah, it's more like a wave. If you would to visualize a wave, there's kind of like a center of gravity at a maybe particular stage, but then there's some elements that flow into the prior stage before that center of gravity, and some elements that flow into later perspective, and that wave kind of changes, right? So that kind of changes shape.
We've got 10 minutes for this part here, and we're going to, yeah.
Cool. So as we move through the stages, the way we move through the stages is to, the first step is to integrate. So what is our current perspectives in a particular, just in life upon ourselves? What are our current perspectives, and how can I include more of these perspectives? It's where we horizontally go into a particular stage and really start to explore all the ins and outs of this particular worldview. So we can become really curious and expansive into what is my current, and also what was my previous way of looking at things, to really ground oneself into a particular stage. That then in and of itself will facilitate an opening up to the next stage, which is where this identification starts to happen. And the reason that starts to happen is either because there's a particular significant life event in a person. So there's like maybe a loss of an intimate other, or an illness, or whatever, or a breakup, whatever that is for someone. But there can be a particular life event that can facilitate opening up to the next stage as well, because that's where the kind of like that questioning comes in. Between stages, there's often a little bit of a wobbly phase. So it feels not necessarily very comfortable, because it's a phase where we don't really know what's true for us, because it's all not really clear what's happening. And that happens throughout all of the stages, throughout the whole. So this is probably, if you can cast back into your memory, this has already been happening in your life, but now we can consciously be aware of that and be consciously on this process in a sense. But yeah, like, so in step 2, we disidentify with our current way of viewing things. And this really happens where we start to like, this is kind of not really working anymore. The way I see these things in this way, it's just not really working for me anymore. So that questioning comes in, disidentification comes in. We transcend the values and the vantage point from this particular stage. And then we move into the next stage as we create a new identity with the new values and the new vantage point at this new stage. And then the cycle happens again, obviously, because then as we are grounding ourselves and integrating ourselves in this new kind of stage, we include the perspectives, we learn lessons, we widen ourselves in this stage, and then we're simultaneously integrating again, right? So this is a cycle that happens throughout all the stages.
And really important to take note that it starts with integration at a particular stage, it's not about trying to get to another stage. And that is grounding ourselves in a healthy way in that stage, and simultaneously seeing the limitations of it is what opens us up and into another stage. Yeah. And so you would know when you moved from one stage to another in life, when you kind of, those periods in life where you started to see the world a little differently, and you look back on your life and it felt like a different life almost. It was like way back then when I was seeing the world in that way, and it just felt like a different life. Yeah, that's a clear distinction between one stage and another in that sense.
Yeah, really different perspectives on the world and so on. Yeah.
And so wobbliness, when you're in between, is absolutely fine. You're simply starting to see more. Yeah, you're able to care for more deeply. You're able to hold more perspectives, and all that's happening, all of that was already possible, and that awareness was already there and is there for all of us, but we're less distracted into some of the concerns at the other stages. So we clear, it's not a getting to the top of the mountain process, this coaching or this course, whatever it might be, but instead it's a clearing process of the distractions so that we can hold, you can only hold more perspectives and have more space for perspectives if you clear the room and make room for it. Yeah. So that you're not distracted and concerned with smaller things and so on. So yeah. Cool.
So the growth, like earlier mentioned, happens first horizontal. So in a particular stage, there is an horizontal expansion through that stage. So there's a development of new skills and certain attributes, knowledge at this particular stage. So that's kind of like through the different stage, we become more familiar with certain traits and aspects of ourselves in a particular stage. Then there's a vertical up. So that's a movement to a later stage. And that's a transformation of growth to the new stage, kind of what we've been speaking about before. And that can be also vertical down, which is a temporary or permanent, depending on the life situation, where life circumstances or the environment, stress or disease might have a switch point or a trigger. So there could be particular, maybe this happens often with parents, right? There is an earlier expression of stages with our parents, just because there are more memories with them often, or with the people that raised us. And switch points are easier to happen there in that environment than with someone that we just met on the street in our girl, or a friend that we met maybe 3 years ago or something, because there's just a really different set of memories and experiences there. So yeah, this just explains a bit of the process and how that works.
And the vertical down, when we say temporary, a temporary switch point vertically down, temporary could be 5 seconds, or it could be a few weeks or a few months or a few years. Yeah. And so I love this saying that they often say, if you feel that you are enlightened already, go spend time with family for a week, right? And if you still feel you're enlightened, then you're doing a really good job. Yeah. And so
Antoinette's laughing about that.
the thought of everyone thinking of going to spend time with their parents for an entire 2 weeks nonstop, right? We all love our parents, all of us, even the parents that are on here. I have to say that because Dad's on here. No. But that's, you know, that's where the
so.
Good job. And so we move into, these are the 3 dimensions that we want to ground through at each stage when we're talking about integrating at each stage. So we have the thinking cognitive dimension, where you've got concepts, knowledge, and interpretation. So you have a knowing as to, you're thinking in that way at that level, and you have a knowing as to what's true for you and right for you in that moment. Then we have the doing. Yeah, so the behavioral dimensions, and it's where your actions start to align with the thinking of that level. Yeah, and you start to integrate in that way. In the orange, that might be, you start to think about, yes, like I've got self-confidence and in being as someone in the world, and your actions start to align with that. And so this is the behavior that we can see on the outside. And as we do those 2, and the thinking and doing, what we're thinking or what we're doing aligns with our thinking, it really, to be able to do that, we need awareness of what we're thinking. We need awareness of what we're doing. And as that starts to align more and more, we then start to more naturally, without so much thinking, be from that place of awareness in that stage. Yeah. And so
maybe an example there then, with what would be an example of thinking, doing, being?
Well, similar to what I was saying there with the orange, where the achiever mindset of orange, where you start to think in that way, you start to get confidence in yourself, and you start to put things into action. Hey, I can pick up whatever habit I want and I can drop whatever habit I want. And it's no longer just thinking it, but your actions start to match your thinking. And at will, you are able to, maybe make choices in life that start to bring about what you're wanting to bring about into life, whether that's the job that you would like to have, or where you would like to live, or even relationally. For example, we might know what may have been more true for us in regards to how we responded to our partner or to a friend, but the action doesn't match, right? So how much more frequently can we start to have our action match what we know is true, for us? And what that requires is awareness, which is why we've combined in this course, we've combined the sitting practice so that we can constantly not train awareness, because awareness is always there, but train getting ourselves out of the distraction and clearing the distraction, so that we can simply watch thoughts arising, not need to do anything with them. But if we watch thoughts arising, then we can choose whether our actions match the thinking or not. Yeah. This is where we become powerful from the being state. This is an exercise that we're going to do during the integration week. Yeah, a really beautiful exercise on feedback and how through the different stages people respond to feedback. Don't want to give you the answers there. So you've been writing a few things down. We're now in regards to where you've seen yourself and in your life going through those stages, and also currently, who do you see going through those stages? Jump in the room and simply share what's come through for you, what you've written down and what you notice there. You don't necessarily need to share where you feel you are. Most people will be sitting around the amber, orange and green in that sense, but share whatever you feel comfortable with sharing. We'll be in there for about 7 minutes or so, and then come out for a group share. Enjoy. So questions? What's come up for you? What have you noticed? Any sharings? Go for it. This is your space now.
I was thinking I was in between some type of integration phase between either orange, green, and teal, but I don't even know because it's super confusing for my construct at the moment. I'm coming in and out of, I think, after the retreat and then being in lockdown, there was not really any structure. So I became very flowy with everything that was happening. And then as I've come back into structure, I sort of recognize myself in different stages. I can recognize like where I was in different stages and how I can instantly recognize going back into normal life, whatever I used to do before lockdown, recognizing where I was and how I've changed. It's quite confronting. So I think that's the integrating part that Sarah was speaking about when she's like, it's actually uncomfortable. And I was like, because even on this call, beginning of the call, I just felt uncomfortable because I'm just moving in and out of space constantly. So it's been weird, but yeah.
And what are some of thank you for sharing, Bridget, what are some of the points or the signs, if you want to call it like that you recognize that in yourself?
I think when I'm sitting down doing something, it's like I just instantly see myself arriving in and out of space, just doing this thing. It's like I see humans and the world as all these forms walking around. And then when I'm watching TV, it's like, okay, here's this form acting out on something that I'm now watching. And this form's done this. And now this form is also somewhere else. So it's just like constant. I don't know if it's analyzing or it's just like constant looking through it rather than being in it type thing.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're describing that you're seeing through the construct of it and the meaning making of it, and you see more reality as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful.
And then the next thing to inquire for yourself and to just observe from the seat of awareness there is, cool, so the thinking is the first thing that tends to come online. That, you know, we may have been spending time in, say, orange, really integrated orange, and then we start to think more in this green way, right? That green level of consciousness. And so what's happening with the actions, right? So aligning the thinking, doing, and being. That's the work in each stage in that sense. And so just to remember to not only be aware of how we're perceiving the world, but also what are our actions saying, and what is our most natural state of being
Communicating.
at
Yeah,
each level.
like what is it? And what are our actions also communicating? Yeah, there's a truthfulness in there as well, and an alignment that needs to happen, and that alignment happens over time. That's a process of like integrating into a particular stage as well. Like that's why it's a bit wobbly at the beginning, because the thinking might happen here, but the actions are still happening here. So that's just different there, right? So there's a sort of a disalignment there. So that's why we call it a bit wobbly. So the moment that starts to line up really beautifully, that's when the stage is just really embodied in that sense and integrated. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions or sharings that came up? What has been noticed?
Lee, Justine and I were talking about shifting between or the experience of being in a state that was happening as an embodied experience in the past, having experienced a higher one, and then going back into that for a period of time. And then what came up for me in response to that was that what the we space, the collective we stage has a massive effect on my day-to-day experience. So how I'm actually interested into how much that affects an individual, or is that just because there's more of a people orientatedness coming from me that wants to connect, so it'll go into that stage. But yeah, the we space, like being at the retreat or being on this call, can evoke more of an integral perspective that can last for a while, and then it can change as well. That came up.
Yeah, it also is, we're gonna later in this course, we do typology descriptions as well. And then after that, we're gonna go into quadrants and native perspectives. And some people have more of a native perspective in the we space, and some people have more of a native perspective in the I space, or in the it space, or in the it space. Maybe that doesn't make sense for everyone right now, but we're gonna explain it. And it doesn't have to necessarily be linked to stages in terms of your more we or collective orientated or more individual orientated. It can also be speaking to a certain native perspective that comes really easily for you. So just keeping that in mind, that it might be related to stages, and you will know that, Kate, for yourself, or it might be related to more what is a native perspective and what is just a perspective that comes more easily for you. Start playing around with it, really, like start noticing is this more native perspective, or am I actually preferencing a particular way of being with other people? And what we see in green happening as well is that often the individual starts to change their own perspective based on the perspective of the group. So if I take myself an example, there are particular opinions being shared here, and then I could, I'm going to say this instead of what I was currently thinking based off what the perspective of the group is telling me, kind of thing, which can seem like a flexibility, but it's actually in green a need to be inclusive in the group. That's that we orientation. That's mostly in the green stage there. So, yeah.
And let's play, unless there's some questions as well, please ask the questions.
I do.
Yes.
Please, Dan. So it occurred to me this week that, I guess flowing on from the conversation that Lee, Kate and I had about the influences that being with other people have on your state of mind, and I don't know, influencing your reactions, that you can step from a space where you're calm and collected and balanced. And I guess it's very easy to be impacted by your interactions with others. And I guess that kind of means that true integration of whatever that earlier stage is probably hasn't happened, and that's indicative of that, because I suspect if you show up in any space just truly honest and yourself, like somehow letting go of being anything or anyone, and just this something personal that like I felt this week is that, you know, being drawn to just be whole and true and nothing, no expectations almost in my interactions. I realized was such a different perspective from trying to sustain something that you felt or moved into before you interact with other people. And therefore, if you're not trying to be something or sustain anything or having any expectations, and just letting go.
Are you talking, just in a question, are you talking about yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, because you're mentioning you in your language. So you're sharing a first person, your individual perspective, but you're sharing it in third person perspective, which sounds, which maybe this is true for others and maybe it's not.
Yeah, true.
It sounds like it's true for you. And it's really important to, in the language pattern, starts to own that. This is my perspective.
I guess I'm asking a question.
Okay, so what's your question?
As in, there's an, you know, is there an absolute truth that this is what you collectively experience? No, yeah. I'm not sure how to rephrase it.
What exactly? What?
Can
you define your question a bit more specific?
I've lost my point now. Just a moment. So I personally have had a lot of experience with finding some sense of balance in being in my own personal space. And then, for instance, moving into a situation of conflict, or not even necessarily conflict, but just a completely different energy from where I have been. And I realized this week that there seemed to be two options that somehow sustain this calm and balance and shift, and or be influenced in that space, whatever that energy is. But I guess my question is, you know, do you should I let go of that need to hold on to that energy and just move into that space, somehow open and letting go, and that's what matters more? Does that make sense?
Justine, what do you feel would be most useful for you? What seems true as an answer? If you just deep in your gut just know.
I guess letting go and not trying to have any expectations.
And so to speak to what you had shared earlier on, yes, it's true that if something's coming up, it hasn't been like there's a trigger coming up, it hasn't been fully integrated, and it might be from a lower stage, right? But then there's another layer there where just because it has come up for us, it doesn't mean that we react, or it could mean we react. Yeah. How do we act in that moment? And so there might not be what's important is to start to note, where are we looking to attain this point of stillness from? So if you are there and there's stuff coming up for you, like feelings and thoughts about what they're saying, does that mean there isn't stillness? Or can you find your place of stillness in the observation of the stuff coming up and still be able to respond in a way that you feel would be useful for you? And sometimes that way would be not responding at all and simply just letting it be, and it's actually better nothing gets said. Or there's another step where, okay, I can bring myself, whilst being triggered here, I can bring myself to share and express to the person, hey, I just want to share this with you. This is what's coming up for me. It's not about you because it's all coming up here. It's happening. It's my thoughts and feelings. There's no outcome in me sharing this with you. I'm just letting you know because I'm just going to sit with this for a little bit. And that is useful as well. And then there's a point at which you're able to actually respond to what they're saying and navigate through the complexity of that situation with that person. And so there's all these different layers. Does that make sense?
Somewhat. My example is of my 9-year-old.
Yeah.
So, you know.
One of your best spiritual practices.
You reckon?
Your dojo. Kids is what they say. I don't have any, but I've been one. And apparently kids can be one of our greatest spiritual, most beautiful spiritual practices. Hayley.
He still is sometimes.
Amen, Dan.
Anything else, Justine? No?
Thank you, Dan.
Hope that was clear, Justine. If you have any other questions or something, you can also reach out through us into, what is that thing again? Text? Telegram, yeah. if you've got any other questions about that, yeah.
And so, you know, if we get enough questions in Telegram, in the text there privately or in the group, then yeah, we were just talking about potentially doing a video where we answer anonymously, not us being anonymous, but the question being anonymous, answering those questions for you, and then posting that video into Telegram so that you can have all of your questions answered in that sense.
Yeah.
And so
with the stages that we also just walked through, there's a fair bit of information that's been shared in a relatively short window of time, right? So it's really like how can you start to recognize this in your day-to-day life, where you for yourself and potentially for other people, and start to really live this as a sort of inquiry process, or as a game, as a play, and start to see these dynamics playing out in reality, because that's where the magic happens. So we kind of have given you a little bit of the understanding of things, and now you can maybe start to somewhat see it, but to really start to familiarize yourself with it happens in your day-to-day life. So that would be really an offer there. And also, as you start to see that in yourself and in other people, it's really to approach it with unconditional love, because people are not defined by their stage, and it's not who they are. So it's not like, it's just not useful, and it can happen pointing at others of like, you should be somewhere else than where you're at, or I should be somewhere else than where I'm at, or this or that. And really approaching with the gentleness and softness in that sense.
And so get really, really curious. Yeah. And please do not take our word for it, and get curious and explore out there and start to see this in the world. Nations, parts of the country, parts of the world, in yourself, at work. Where are you seeing these different stages? And so we'll start to slowly shift gears now. And what we're really moving into now is deepening our awareness of breath. Yeah. And before we move into that practice, let's have a little bit of a conversation now, just changing the topic, specifically about the practice. Yeah. What has been working for you? How has the morning routine been going? And what is the purpose of it? Why are we doing this sitting practice? Yeah? Is there such thing as a good sitting practice and a bad sitting practice? Oh, that really sucked, that one. Why? Any comments, questions?
Can I make a comment? Actually, that's so I wake up quite anxious in the morning. So I took on what you said, Dan, and I do it straight, like pretty much as soon as I get up, I just go and sit in the same spot in my room. But it's hard for me because, yeah, I don't know, I wake up with so many thoughts, like basically every morning. So it's just sort of, I feel like all my practices, whilst I love them, I'm still constantly observing thoughts, and it's like, will it ever stop? But still, like I still feel so much better. But it's just, I think it's a me thing that I just wake up already in a heightened state. So
yeah, for sure. And so really important there, are you the thoughts?
no, I don't think I am.
Now, that can be challenging to remember that when the mind is going crazy. Yeah. But if you can, remind yourself. Yeah. And see if you can slow things down, including your movements, including your breath. And we're going to go into that. And similar to, I think there was a question in, I'm loving the interaction in Telegram, which is beautiful. There was a question in there around, I think it was around what do I do if there's so much happening? So, oh no, actually, do we go into the Insight Timer app and can we use the guided meditations, or should we be sitting in silence and just observing our breath in that sense? The reason we highly suggest everyone sit without it being guided at this point in time is because we want you to go through these 10 weeks establishing a practice that is not dependent upon anything. You could be anywhere, anytime, in the middle of a conversation or without your phone, sitting somewhere on a rock, and you can drop into a stillness and a silence. And that doesn't, like we just said, dropping into a stillness doesn't necessarily mean the mind shuts off. So that everyone can, if there have been judgments as to how often the mind pops up, how often the mind is thinking and a thought pops up and it's just like, oh geez, I can't even get a second without the thought. In Western society, on average, when they've done the electromagnetic imaging and so on, it's about 2 seconds between thoughts for a Westerner. Yeah, close your eyes. And how long if you try and stop thinking, no thoughts, starting from now? When's the first thought that creeps in? Oh, this silence is going on for a while. Was I supposed to do something now? Whatever the thought might be, right? It's 2 seconds for a Westerner on average. Yeah. And so the judgment, what we're doing is we're finding stillness here in observing the thoughts and observing the feelings. Let them run. If you try to stop those thoughts and feelings, guess what will happen to them? Imagine you walking to a creek where there's a beautiful creek, flowing water, flowing river, and you stick your hand in it trying to stop it. What happens to the water up against your hand? It starts to bubble up, right? That's what will happen to the mind. And instead, if you simply stop stirring, then the mud and the sediment will start to settle. And the water alone will become more and more and more clear and still. There's no such thing as a good or bad sitting. No such thing. You are a different, like the state of mind, state of body is different every day with so many variables, from the sleep you had, the conversations you had, the food that you had, the activity that you did, the amount of work that you did, all of these variables constantly shifting and changing the state of your mind and body. And so notice if you're coming into the sitting hoping that this will be a good one, that it'll be super quiet, because that immediately starts to set one up for that failure, because already it's thinking about hoping that this will be a good one. But instead, find joy in being able to sit in the seat of awareness, watching it all play out. Because presence is presence, yeah? With this sitting practice, sure, right now we want to keep a pretty still and or silent, sorry, but it doesn't have to be, but a relatively silent environment. But as you establish yourself in this sitting practice, you should be able to sit next to a construction site, next to a jackhammer going off, and then hear the sound of that jackhammer as simply a sound before you've labeled it as a jackhammer. And be present to the unfolding of that as it starts and then as it stops without you doing anything. When you hear a car passing by, can you hear it without labeling it as a car and simply as a sound? Hear it as that in the way that you would have before you learned what a car sounds like. Start to find joy being in the seat of awareness of all that is playing out, whether that be thoughts or not. And at the moment, as we're simply looking to bring into a more single point of awareness our focus, just know that your go-to is your breath. Again, and again, and again, and again. And so we'll bring in a technique today. Has everyone, in regards to the technique itself and counting the 4 seconds, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 2 seconds, has that all been working fine in that sense? Any questions around that? Sure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the 4 seconds. I took that on board from last week, and I find it much nicer and something to focus on. I really like that.
Yeah, and it's useful until it's not, in that sense. So use it as long as you find it useful. And as certain things get introduced every week, there isn't a need to quickly, I'll introduce a technique that can be integrated with the counting. And as someone feels, if you feel moved to stop the counting, then do so. Maybe there's 2 or 3 sessions in the week where you try without counting and the rest you do with counting. Yes, there's no rigidity in this. Do what seems to be working for you in that sense.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Lawrence, if you could take it easy on the chat box, because we're trying to achieve a single point of focus here. And
I started the distraction. Sorry for that.
So Sara is not what we're looking to get distracted into. When we're distracted into Sara, then we reduce our capacity for care and perspective taking. We want to go up the stages and clear our distractions in that sense. So today the technique that we're going to introduce, and this is really useful if you feel that the water is quite stirred up. Yeah, the mind is quite stirred up. You can bring this in if you like. It's called the Ujjayi breath. Yeah, some of you, particularly those that are acquainted with yoga, would be aware of the Ujjayi breath. And basically the Ujjayi breath is where you create this back pressure across the back of your throat. And this back pressure, it's very similar to when you fog up a window. Right, so if everyone can put their hand in front of their mouth and now make that same sound, but breathing in. Now continue to make that sound, but close your mouth. So you're breathing a little firmer, still fogging up that glass on the window, but with your mouth closed. And you'll feel that back pressure on the back of the throat. Now, rather than that just being some weird woo-woo, like super meditator, as Dave might like to perceive in that sense, there's a bit of science behind that. That back pressure, as well as breathing through the nose, not only during your sitting practice, but also throughout the day, that back pressure causes a stimulation of the vagus nerve. Yeah, and we're going to be diving deep into the vagus nerve. You're going to learn a lot about it because it is what innervates the heart, the lungs, and the gut, and the connection between brain and gut. And when that back pressure happens, we release a natural relaxant in the body. And you'll start to feel this gentle warmth that comes over the body, and that's nitric oxide that starts to get released as we just breathe with a... And notice that you've done that before. You've sat on the couch or whatever after a day's worth of work, and either your mouth's closed or open, but you've with the closed mouth, and you've just been there and you've just gone. Our body has been doing these things. We're now just going to more intentionally do them. Yeah. And so the reason this is useful with a busier mind is because it gives you something a little more prominent in the breath to focus on. A little firmer in your breathing. And we're now going to deepen our awareness of our breath. And riding that awareness, whether we're counting or not, riding that awareness all the way in. Let's have a go at that now. Let's have a good 5 minutes giving that a go. Yeah. Whoa, ready for bed there, Mel. We'll get you all ready. Drop the brain waves down into a calmer, slower mode. Yeah. And so gently closing your eyes, getting yourself comfortable. Seated if you can. And opening up, as we offered up earlier on, give me a moment with me, telling yourself that, asking yourself that in your mind's voice, and then let your body respond to that as you arrive in the seat of awareness of your me. Letting that first breath out be one that goes all the way out. I want you to allow your breath to arise within your awareness so that you are aware of your breath as it flows in and as it flows out. Gently allowing it to slow down just a little bit more with each breath out. And as you do so, notice how the body follows suit as you slow your breath down. And as you do so, gently start to allow that slow breath to remain slow, yet become firmer as you breathe through the nose, fogging up that window. keeping your awareness on that breath. As it rides in, and then floating at the top, in no rush to let it out, but doing so when it's comfortable. Letting it out. Floating at this end, at the bottom of the breath, being in no rush to take the next breath in, and also not forcing your stay here. Be with the breath. The sensation of the breath as it brushes past your nostrils. The temperature of the breath. Any difference you might feel on the way in versus the way out. If a thought pops in, that's okay. You've just become aware of your thought. How beautiful. And then returning to the breath. It is about a constant allowance and permission that you are giving yourself to be nowhere else but here with your breath. A permission for rest and a permission for being. The firmness of that breath might fluctuate throughout the sitting, might become softer, which is fine. Doesn't have to be at a constant firmness. And you might bring that firmness back in. Regardless, bring your awareness to your breath. gift yourself with as little as these 5 to 10 minutes of being with breath daily. Fill this cup up and come from here into your day. The more frequently and the more time that you spend in this sitting on a daily basis, the easier it will be for you to perceive your world, your life, throughout the day from this space. The easier it will be for you to slow your breath down as stuff might be getting heated. Simply go back to that very thing you practice daily. So when the gong goes off and you're in Saitama, remember, take a good 60 seconds or more, waiting and allowing for the sound of the gong to finish. Really moving into your day with this gentleness. And allow for a bit of a transition into your day, rather than quickly rushing on to the next thing. And always remember that you've got this. You are awareness itself, not the thoughts playing out. This spaciousness is you, and always has been. Gently opening your eyes when you're ready. Any questions, please let us know in the Telegram. I'll quickly share the practices for the coming week. So 5 to 10 minutes of deepening your breath awareness of breath. And the self-awareness practice for this week is the knowing and doing, which feeds into your being. Notice where your doing is aligned / not aligned with your knowing. So write one situation a day where you it's those situations where you look back and you're like, if I could do that again, I would have done that differently. Where your action was not aligned with what you knew to be true for you. Yeah, we want to start having your actions aligned with what you know to be true for you. And then also, if you can, include moments where, hey, your action was actually aligned with what you know to be true for you. And that starts to feed into your way of being. It's really important before the next session that you complete the personality profiling test. Give yourself 45 minutes to complete this. Yeah, there's not too much thinking involved. There's 2 answers for each one, and you just go for whichever one pops into mind first. Yeah. Write 2 points about your Enneagram typology that comes up. So we'll receive the results and send that to you. We'll also, if you can do it earlier in the week, then we will send you out, as soon as you've completed it, we'll send you out a 30-minute comprehensive recording of a descriptor of that type. And then it's for you to figure out, yeah, that mostly sounds like me most of the time. And then you kind of know that that's you in that sense. So if you do it early enough, then we're going to be able to send that out before next session. We are spending the next 2 weeks on the Enneagram as well. I won't speak to Kajabi. Pod practices seem like they're going really well. Reach out to Lawrence if you're having any issues with those. Discussing your streak in terms of your sitting practice wins and challenges, and what have you been noticing in regards to the stages and ego development. Personality assessment. One of the SN coaches will be reaching out to you for your one-on-one support session to make sure that you are getting the support that that you need specifically, that goes beyond the group support. And the integral health and well-being assessment, which has been made available for the last 2 weeks, there's about half the people that have completed it. It's not a must by any means, but the assessment going through there, we don't go through the answers, but what they do is it really brings some awareness to things that you might like to be shifting in regards to particular behaviors around your overall well-being of mind, of body, of relationship, of work, all of those things. So really useful to complete that assessment there. Retreat, we have just made the retreat public, and so there were 12 spots, but there's now 7 spots available for retreat, which is, I think anyone in New South Wales will be able to travel up. It's being held in Byron, and it's in December 7th to the 10th. And we'll be delving into silence and sensing. And yeah, it was a really, really beautiful experience last time around. A whole heap of people on this call from then. And so if you're interested, please reach out and we can send you more information in regards to that. Thank you everyone for the way that you are showing up to this point, and really know that it is your own self-application that's going to really allow for your own evolution to occur. And everyone's showing up in a really beautiful way. We have some really exciting sessions coming up like every session is really beautiful. So looking forward to it. And in 3 sessions time, we're having an integration session. We're hitting pause, slowing down, let's absorb it all. Yeah. And then we'll move forward again. Then we'll have another integration session, and then we'll have that final session. Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
beautiful
you.
evening.
Bye.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.